I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. What I am about to say is not strategy, not propaganda, and not an attempt to persuade anyone to follow me. It is simply the truth as I have lived it. I speak about God, about Jesus, and about faith because Africa has been wounded too deeply by lies dressed as salvation. I speak because our leaders, our people, and our children deserve values that heal rather than control. I want to be clear from the beginning. I am not here to attack Christianity, Islam, or any faith. I am here to affirm God, to seek what is true, and to return dignity to belief in a land that has known poverty, instability, and endless conflict. What follows is not theory, it is memory. I still remember the dawn in Ouagadougou when the first light turned the fine red dust of our land into gold. The air was quiet, almost reverent. That was the morning Oprah Winfrey's plane landed. There was no ceremony prepared for cameras, no banners, no speeches. Just the sound of the wind and the rising sun over Africa. Oprah did not come to me as a television icon. She came as a woman searching for something deeper than headlines. She told me later that she was tired of noise, tired of certainty without compassion, tired of faith spoken loudly but lived shallowly. She said she wanted truth, belief, and meaning without performance. When we met for the first time, I came alone. No convoy. No armed escort. In Burkina Faso, leadership still means walking among your people. She looked at me with curiosity and caution, as anyone should when listening to power. I did not try to impress her. I said only one thing, quietly and honestly. In Burkina Faso, we do not only speak about faith, we live with it. There were no studio lights, no large crew, no pressure to entertain. We chose a peaceful place where belief could breathe, where silence could speak as clearly as words. That was when Oprah asked me something unexpected. She said she did not want to talk about politics, sanctions, or power. She wanted to talk about Christianity, about Jesus, about what faith truly means to me as an African leader. I paused because I knew my answer would surprise her. I knew it might trouble some and comfort others, but I also knew it had to be honest. What I shared with her that day was not a rejection of Jesus, it was a defense of him. It was not a denial of Christianity. It was a remembrance of what it was meant to be before fear, control, and empire reshaped it. Below are the things I told Oprah Winfrey about Christianity and about Jesus in Africa. I speak them now to Muslims and Christians, to leaders of the Sahel, to the world, and to every believer who still feels God stirring quietly in the heart. The silence after that first exchange stayed with us. It did not feel empty. It felt intentional, as if the land itself was listening. The transition into the interview did not happen with a signal or a cue. It happened naturally, when both of us understood that this conversation was not meant to perform but to reveal. This interview was unlike any I had experienced before. There were no bright lights washing out the face, no producers whispering urgency, no countdown clock reminding us of airtime. We chose a simple setting, open to the sky, where the breeze moved freely and nothing demanded attention except presence. Faith, I have learned, does not speak well when rushed. Oprah set her notes aside. I noticed that immediately. That gesture alone told me this would not be an exchange of questions and answers, but a shared searching. We were not there to defend positions. We were there to tell the truth as we had lived it, even if that truth was uncomfortable. In Africa, especially in the Sahel, we have learned to listen differently. Conflict teaches you that words spoken loudly often mean very little. Survival teaches you to listen for what is not being said. I told Oprah that before we began. I told her that if she wanted rehearsed answers, she would be disappointed. But if she wanted honesty, she would hear things rarely spoken by men in my position. She nodded, slowly, her eyes softened. That was when I understood that she was not there to interview a president. She was there to encounter a human being wrestling with God, history, and responsibility. We spoke without interruption. Sometimes there were long pauses between sentences. In those pauses, I could hear birds, distant movement, and the quiet persistence of life continuing around us. It reminded me of something my grandfather once said, that God often speaks in the space between words, because only there are we humble enough to listen. I told Oprah that faith in Africa has never depended on microphones. It survived droughts, invasions, slavery, and borders drawn by strangers. It survived because it was lived, not announced. When faith becomes spectacle, it often loses its soul. She asked me if I was nervous speaking about religion so openly, knowing how sensitive and politicized it has become. I answered her truthfully. I said, fear no longer guides me. Too many decisions on this continent have been made out of fear, and they have cost us generations. This conversation felt different because it was not about converting anyone. It was about remembering Remembering who God is beyond institutions, remembering who Jesus stood with, remembering that belief, when stripped of power and profit, becomes something gentle and dangerous at the same time. As the sun rose higher, I felt a strange calm, not certainty but clarity. I knew that what I was about to share next would challenge many assumptions, especially among those who believe faith must look Western to be valid. But clarity, I have learned, is worth the cost. That was when Oprah finally asked me about Christianity itself. When Oprah asked me about Christianity, her voice was calm, almost careful. She said she wanted to speak not about institutions, not about churches or denominations, but about Jesus himself. She wanted to know what Christianity meant to me, not as a president, but as a man shaped by Africa, history, and faith. I took a breath before answering because this was not a question to rush. In Africa, breath matters. It reminds you that life is borrowed, not owned. I told her that Christianity in its beginning was not a system. It was an invitation to stand upright, to be free inside even when the body is oppressed, to see God not as a weapon but as a companion in suffering. I said that Jesus did not arrive with an army or a throne. He arrived walking. He touched those society avoided. He spoke in stories so ordinary that power could not easily seize them. To me, that Jesus is deeply familiar. He resembles the elders who sit under trees and speak wisdom without shouting. He resembles the mothers who feed children before themselves. He resembles resistance without hatred. But I told Oprah something that made her look up sharply. I said that somewhere along the way, human beings transformed this message of liberation into a structure of control. Fear replaced love. Obedience replaced conscience. And the name of Jesus, which once gave courage to the powerless, was used to silence them. I did not say this with anger. I said it with sadness. Because when a sacred message is distorted, it wounds both the believer and the unbeliever. In Africa, we have lived with that wound for generations. We were told to bow our heads in prayer while our lands were taken. We were told suffering was holy, while others profited from it. I explained to Oprah that this does not mean Christianity is false. It means it has been misused. A knife can cut bread, or it can cut flesh. The difference is not the tool, but the intention of the hand holding it. Christianity arrived in Africa with two faces. One face was compassion, the other was domination. We have had to learn, painfully, to tell the difference. Oprah asked me if I still considered myself close to Jesus after all this history. I smiled, because the answer was simple. I told her that I feel closer to Jesus when I strip away everything done in his name and return to how he lived. When I read his words without hearing the echo of empire behind them, I recognize a truth that feels ancient and alive. I said that Jesus never asked anyone to abandon their humanity to follow him. He asked them to deepen it. He did not build walls between people. He crossed them. And when faith does the opposite, when it creates hierarchy instead of humility, then it has lost its way. I told Oprah that many people today pray constantly but do not love deeply. They speak scripture fluently but do not serve quietly. They live inside rituals but far from God. This, to me, is the great crisis of modern religion. Not disbelief but disconnection. She was silent for a long moment after that. Then she asked me about Africa's past and how Christianity became entangled with colonial power. That question carried the weight of memory. When she asked about colonial history, I felt my chest tighten in a way I have learned not to hide. Some memories do not belong only to the past. They breathe inside families. They pass quietly from grandparents to children, not as dates or documents, but as posture, caution, and silence. I told her that Christianity in Africa arrived wearing two faces. One face was gentle. It built schools, healed the sick, and offered comfort to the broken. Many missionaries lived with sincerity, sacrifice, and love. I will never deny that. But the other face was harder to look at. It came aligned with flags, borders, and authority. It did not ask. It imposed. I explained that for many African communities, the Bible was introduced at the same moment as loss of land, loss of language, loss of self-definition. The message of salvation was spoken while contracts were signed elsewhere. One hand offered heaven, the other took the earth. That contradiction did not go unnoticed by our ancestors. I shared with Oprah a story about my grandmother. She was not a political woman. She did not speak in slogans or ideologies. She spoke in memory. She told me how, as a young girl, she watched villagers kneel in prayer while officials marked boundaries on maps. She remembered the sound of hymns mixing with the sound of boots on dry soil. She said the prayers were sincere. The theft was also real. I told Oprah that my grandmother never rejected God, but she learned to separate God from those who claimed ownership over him. She said something to me once that I have never forgotten. She said, "If God demands your silence in the face of injustice, then someone else is speaking in his name." That sentence shaped me more than any book. It taught me that faith without dignity is not faith, it is surrender. And Africa has surrendered enough. I told Oprah very clearly without raising my voice. We do not need to be saved. We already have faith. Before Western religion arrived, Africa already knew God. We knew him in the rhythm of seasons, in ancestors who taught restraint and generosity, in fire that warmed and warned, in lullabies that carried wisdom before children understood words. Our understanding of God was not abstract, it was relational. God was not locked inside buildings. He was encountered in responsibility to one another and to the land. When foreign religion arrived and dismissed this as primitive, it did more than insult culture. It fractured spiritual confidence. Oprah listened closely. I could see she was not defending, not interrupting, she was absorbing. I told her that the tragedy is not that Christianity came to Africa, but that it arrived claiming monopoly over God. When any faith declares itself the sole owner of truth, it begins to rot from the inside. I said that this history still shapes how Africans experience religion today. Many struggle between reverence and resentment. Many love Jesus but distrust institutions. Many believe deeply but feel spoken down to by those who inherited power, not wisdom. I told her that this is why so many modern religious movements fail our people. They repeat the language of submission without justice. They preach patience to the hungry and obedience to the oppressed. They confuse holiness with silence. Oprah finally spoke again. She asked me whether I believed modern religion had lost its way globally, not only in Africa. I did not hesitate. I told her yes, without hesitation. I said the distortion of religion today is not confined to one continent or one culture. It is global, it is subtle, and it is dangerous precisely because it often disguises itself as devotion. I explained that much of modern religion teaches submission rather than liberation. It teaches people to accept their position instead of questioning injustice. In many places, especially where poverty and instability persist, religion has become a tool to manage pain rather than to heal its causes. People are told to endure quietly, to wait for reward elsewhere, while inequality is treated as fate rather than failure. I said something to Oprah that I knew would be difficult for some to hear. I told her that religion, when distorted, has taught black people to see themselves as lesser, not always directly but through silence, through images of God that never look like them, through sermons that explain suffering without challenging the systems that create it. I spoke about greed clothed in holiness, about pastors and preachers who live in abundance while their congregations remain trapped in despair. I told her that wealth itself is not the sin, indifference is. When justice, truth, and compassion no longer have a place in the house of God, then the building may be full, but the spirit has left. I reminded her that Jesus did not build an empire. He did not seek proximity to power. He stood with the sick, the poor, the excluded, and the accused. He challenged religious authority more than political authority. That is why he was dangerous. That is why he was killed. To turn him into a symbol of control is not just a misunderstanding, it is a betrayal. Oprah asked me if I feared backlash for speaking this way. I told her that fear has never protected truth. Silence has never saved a soul. If faith cannot survive honest questioning, then it is not faith. It is habit. The next morning, we did not meet in a room. We met outside, under a baobab tree older than memory. Oprah removed her shoes without being asked. I noticed that. I sat with my grandfather's old notebook in my hands. He was a man without titles, but full of wisdom. My grandfather used to say that if you want to see God, look at the wind, the rain, and the eyes of children. That was his theology. No books. No fear, just attention. I told Oprah that this was the faith I grew up with. A faith that did not separate God from nature. A faith that did not lock him behind walls. I said that Western Christianity often removed God from the world and placed him inside churches, then closed the doors. In doing so, it taught people to search for God in specific places rather than in how they live. It narrowed the sacred instead of expanding it. I told her that I do not oppose religion. I want to liberate it, to free it from fear, from power, from division. I believe that if you live in truth, whether Christian, Muslim, or following ancestral wisdom, you walk with God. Faith does not need labels to be real. I looked at Oprah and said something I had never said publicly before. I told her that heaven is not a destination, it is a way of living. It is how we treat one another when no one is watching. She did not respond immediately. Later, she told me she could not sleep that night. In her journal, she wrote that too many people worship the finger and never look at the moon it points to. When she spoke about our conversation to the world, reactions were divided. Some criticized, some welcomed it, but everyone was forced to think again. She said in a live stream that she had rediscovered freedom and faith. When truth enters a room, lies are always the loudest. I told my people that I did not come to destroy religion. I came to unlock it, to return it to the living God, not the managed one. I prayed that Africa would one day teach the world what unbound faith looks like. A faith that loves without fear, a faith that remembers. When Oprah left Burkina Faso, the dust settled quickly. Planes always do that. They arrive with sound and urgency, and they leave behind quiet. What remains is not the visitor, but the echo of what was said and what was finally heard. She did not say that I preached to her. She wrote later that I reminded her of something she already knew but had forgotten. I understood that deeply. Truth rarely introduces itself as something new. More often it returns as something familiar we abandoned to survive. I have carried that conversation with me since then, not as pride and not as proof. I carry it as a responsibility. Because when words touch something sacred in another human being, they demand consistency afterward. They ask you to live what you dared to say. So now I speak beyond Oprah. I speak to Muslims and Christians, to elders and leaders, to those who still pray and those who no longer know how. I speak especially to those who believe faith must be loud to be real. It does not. I believe the world is not suffering from a lack of religion, it is suffering from a lack of courage within religion. Too many leaders invoke God while ignoring justice. Too many institutions protect themselves before they protect the vulnerable. Too many believers confuse loyalty to structures with loyalty to truth. I ask leaders, especially in Africa and the Sahel, to pause before they speak God's name. Ask whether your decisions reflect His character or merely your ambition. Power that kneels before God does not fear accountability. Power that uses God fears exposure. I ask believers to return to the heart of faith, not to abandon churches or mosques, but to refuse fear as their foundation. Love does not require terror. Truth does not need threats. God does not need defenders who forget compassion. To the world watching Africa, often through the lens of poverty and conflict, I say this: we are not a continent waiting to be saved. We are a continent remembering itself. We are learning again how to pray without chains, how to lead without stealing souls, how to believe without surrendering dignity. I pray now, not as a politician, but as a man accountable to something greater than history. Jesus, I ask your blessing upon Burkina Faso. Heal our land from violence that numbs the heart. Protect our children from inheriting despair. Give our leaders the courage to choose justice when corruption feels easier. I ask your blessing upon Africa. Restore what was taken without asking. Heal memories that still ache. Teach us to forgive without forgetting, and to lead without imitating those who wounded us. I ask your blessing upon me. Strip me of pride when it grows unnoticed. Correct me when power tempts me to stop listening. Give me the humility to step aside when truth requires it. I do not ask for victory, I ask for clarity. I do not ask for comfort, I ask for integrity. Let my faith never become a costume. Let it remain a discipline of love. If these words have stirred something in you, do not rush past it. Sit with it, speak about it, question it, share it if it helps you remember what matters. And if you wish, stay with this conversation, because we are only beginning to speak honestly about faith in a wounded world. I understand. I will continue not by adding spectacle, but by widening the silence into meaning. There are moments when a leader must stop explaining and begin listening, even to his own doubts. I have learned that faith does not grow in certainty, it grows in responsibility. The older I become, the more I understand that belief is not something you hold. It is something that holds you accountable. When I think of the elders who will hear these words in the United States and the United Kingdom, men and women who have lived long enough to see ideals rise and fall, I do not ask them to agree with me. I ask them only to remember what first moved them toward God. Before politics, before fear, before disappointment hardened hope. Many of you were taught that Jesus came to build a religion. I do not believe that. I believe he came to restore sight, to help human beings see one another again, to make love dangerous to injustice, to make conscience louder than obedience. That message does not belong to Africa alone, nor to the West. It belongs wherever suffering is explained instead of confronted. I have sat with Muslim leaders who pray 5 times a day and still weep for the poor. I have walked with Christians who serve without preaching. I have learned from traditional elders who speak of God without naming him, yet honor him in how they live. From all of them I have learned the same truth. God is not impressed by labels, he is revealed through action. To the leaders of the Sahel, I say this quietly but firmly: do not hide behind faith while betraying your people. God is not fooled by language, he listens to consequences. History is merciless with those who use God to excuse cruelty, corruption, or cowardice. To the world, I say this with humility. Africa is not asking for permission to believe. We are asking to be seen as equal partners in defining what faith looks like in the modern age. We are done accepting a God who arrives only through suffering and never through justice. And to every believer, regardless of tradition, I leave you with the same question I ask myself each morning. Does my faith make me more human or less? Does it open my hands or close them? Does it bring me closer to the wounded or protect me from seeing them? If your belief cannot survive those questions, it may not be belief at all. It may only be habit. If these words have stayed with you longer than expected, do not push them away. Speak about them with someone you trust. Leave a comment if you feel compelled. Stay connected if you want to continue this kind of conversation. Not because it agrees with you, but because it asks something of you. Each day I wake up and must choose again. There is no final victory, only awareness or surrender.